Hey everyone, it's Mrs. Gross, and I am getting this video together for you guys to help you if you've missed Coastal Competition, which is one of the labs that we've been doing. We started it Friday, worked in it on Monday, did the actual hands-on gathering the data part, and then today, Tuesday in class, we went through and discussed the data, what it meant, went through and answered some questions and made sure that we understood some academic vocabulary. So I put this together to help you guys because if you're receiving this, then you are out of class one of those days or you've gotten behind because of absences. And I want to help get you caught up and make you feel like you know what's going on. So we're going to do our Coastal Competition assignment. In your email, you should have a notice from me saying that I have shared with you the Coastal Competition student lab sheet and analysis questions. And so if you would stop the video now and find that sheet and get it opened up so you can toggle back and forth. You might need to stop the video at times so that you can type in answers to the worksheet. Or if you're really great, you can split your screen and have the worksheet up on one part of the screen and the video going on the other. Hope this helps you out for you guys that haven't been able to join us in class, and I sure hope that you're able to get back here soon. I've undershared with me. I sent it to you as a view only. So you will need to go up into the top left-hand corner to File and tell it to make a copy. And then, of course, change your name to have your personal name on there. And then we're going to talk a little bit about this. So with the Coastal Competition Lab, we are starting to look at food webs, ecosystems, interactions between different organisms within an ecosystem. So the first thing it asked us to do was to go through and to create a food web using the starfish, a carnivorous snail, barnacles, chitin, and herbivorous snails, and then phytoplankton. Okay. And so this is already filled in. We did this in class and discussed it together. And so when we look at this right here, this is our food web. Phytoplankton is our producer in this food web, and the mussel, the barnacle, the chitin, and the herbivorous snail are all primary consumers or herbivores, and they eat the phytoplankton. The carnivorous snail will eat the mussel and the barnacle, so it's a secondary consumer in that role. And then the starfish will eat the herbivorous snail, the chitin, the barnacle, the mussel, and the carnivorous snail. So the starfish is a secondary consumer, or in the case of when it's eating the carnivorous snail, it's a tertiary consumer. Okay. The starfish in this example is our apex predator. And so it's important that you notice that. Okay. We want to come down and look at these questions. And as we look at these questions, it says, based on the food web, which organism is going to have the greatest impact on the ecosystem? So I want you to look at your food web here, and I want you to answer that right here. I want you to tell me which of those organisms do you think is going to have the greatest impact on the ecosystem? So I did a sentence starter there for you, and you can go ahead and stop the video and answer that question. Now, I want you to go back to the second question in your worksheet, and it wants to know which organism does the starfish not prey upon and why. So stop the video, and I want you to answer which organism does the starfish not prey upon and why. Now that you have your answer filled in, the starfish does not prey on the phytoplankton. Okay, the phytoplankton is a producer, and the starfish is a carnivore, and so the starfish is going to eat other things that eat the phytoplankton, but because it is a carnivore and not a herbivore or an omnivore, it does not eat on the phytoplankton. Journal and downloaded it from Canvas. We went in and started the reading and did some quick summary sentences that go with each of the paragraphs. So if you have not downloaded the 8th grade science journal because you weren't here on since Thursday, you'll download the 8th grade journal, save it to your Google Drive, So you have to make a copy for yourself and then see me when you get back, and I'll help you organize everything into a science folder. If you were here, then you should have already read the article that was in the journal, and it talks about Darwin and his descent with modification and natural selection. And it goes through and talks about how organisms pass on beneficial traits from one generation to the next. And that passing on traits from one generation to the next is how populations are able to adapt. It talks about natural selection, and natural selection is referred to a lot of times as survival of the fittest. And that's where something that is most suited for the environment is going to continue to thrive when something else may not be suited for the environment and they are not able to live and reproduce and continue within the ecosystem. Okay. And the struggle for existence shapes the traits of the population and the community as they compete for the resources that are there. So, if you were not able to do that in class, then you'll want to make sure that you have downloaded your eighth grade science journal from my Canvas page and that you scroll down towards the bottom of the slides there and you take the time to read that and do your summary sentences. So, if you need to, you'll need to stop the video now and do that part of the assignment. If you've already done that, great, super exciting. We're going to be talking about natural selection moving forward here. My best example of natural selection is if you have a population of wild rabbits and they are in an area where the ground is covered with snow most of the time. If part of your population is brown bunnies and part of your population is white bunnies, then the white bunnies are going to survive because they're better suited for the environment because they can camouflage into the snow. The brown bunny is not able to change his fur color to white, and therefore he may be picked off by a hawk or some other predator. And eventually, over time, the population will shift so that most of the bunnies have white fur, and that would be an adaptation. That's when the population has adapted after many generations of the bunnies that were surviving being white, and those being the ones that were able to reproduce and continue on. So we're going to go to the next page, and that is a little circle map of natural selection. And so you may have remembered natural selection from the 7th grade. And so you can put a couple things in there that you remember about natural selection. One of the most important things being it is a natural process. It is not a man-made process. And another thing that would be very important to remember is that is the survival of the fittest. The ones that are most fit for the environment are the ones that are going to continue to live and thrive and reproduce. So the purpose of the coastal competition lab is to simulate the effects of a predaceous starfish on the diversity of a community that is made up of barnacles, mussel, chitin, and snails. It is important to point out that each of these species, when we were in class, we represented with a different color of bead. And so you may hear me say things, and I'll tell you how we got the data in just a few minutes. But we are going to simulate the effect of the diversity in that population. And then we're also going to simulate the effects of removing the predaceous starfish and what happens to the diversity of the community at that point. Also, each species is competing for limited space. Competition can force some of the species out of the ecosystem and they will have to move someplace else or they won't survive. So those are the things that we'll be looking at as we go through this lab. The procedures, we started out with a random draw of 25 different beads, and each color of bead represented a different organism that you'll see on your data sheet. And then we went through and we had the different animals fed. And so we did that by rolling a dice. And we had a little wheel that would tell us what ate how much. So the starfish usually ate half of our largest population and then maybe one other little organism. And then the other thing that eats, that is carnivorous, is the carnivorous snail, and it would eat usually just one of the other organisms, just one individual, not like half of a whole population. So we did that, and let me show you what that data looks like. We started off with the 2 carnivorous snails, 6 orange mussels, 7 yellow barnacles, 9 green chitin, and 1 violet colored herbaceous snail. And so when we rolled the dice and used our wheel to see what they ate, the sea star ate half of our largest population, which was the green chitin. And if he bites one of them in half, then it's not going to live. So we ended up with only 4 of those. He also ate 1 yellow barnacle. Okay. And then we rolled the die one more time to see what happened with the red carnivorous snail. And in the first instance, the red carnivorous snail moved away. Then that gets us our final generation, for our final numbers for generation 1. In order to get generation 2, we had to go in and have a reproductive cycle. And so there are some rules about how these organisms reproduce. It starts with the orange mussel, and every time that we move to the next generation, the orange mussel doubles its population size. The yellow barnacle, green chitin, and violet colored herbaceous snails, for every 2 that you have, then you get 1 more. So if you look at that, we had 6 yellow barnacles. And so 6 divided by 2 is 3. And so we've got 3 more barnacles that are coming. So 6 plus 3 is 9. And so we did the reproduction that way for the yellow barnacle and the green chitin. And then for the herbaceous snail, there was not enough to have reproduction occur according to that rule. And so it gets 1 because our instructions told us for every organism that doesn't meet the rule for reproduction, we're going to give it just 1. The red carnivorous snail, the rule for its reproduction was for every 4 that we had, we got 1 more. And so it also does not follow the guidelines for reproduction. And so we added 1 according to the rule that was in our instruction. Okay. We continued that for generation 2, generation 3, and generation 4. And if you look at it, the populations, they fluctuated, but they were all within a range where we still had all the different organisms present in our ecosystem. The instructions told us after generation 4, before we continued to generation 5, we remove our starfish. And so that takes away one of our steps. We are no longer going to have the starfish eating during this activity. So we're going to go ahead and answer a couple of questions here. And one is, what role did the starfish play within the ecosystem? And so I want to talk to you about this. The starfish is an apex predator. It's kind of the top of the food web that we have going on here. But the starfish is also called a keystone species. Okay. And a keystone species is important because it is a species within an ecosystem that has a larger than expected impact on the environment or on the ecosystem. Okay. So the starfish is a consumer. He's our apex predator, but he is also a keystone species. So make sure you get that typed in on your sheet. So when we ask, how do you think the removal of the starfish will affect the populations of organisms? Okay. I gave you a sentence starter to answer that. If we remove the starfish, then the other populations will. And this is where you're going to kind of make your hypothesis or your prediction. What is going to happen to the other populations? And so if you need to, you can stop the video and put in your answer there. But please make sure you type in an answer for that. Was when we first drew our beads out, we had to lay them onto the rocky shoreline. If you notice that our rocky shoreline here, it has spots for up to 50 organisms. Okay, so we can only have a maximum of 50 organisms at a time. This data may not be the exact data in the data chart. I had a friend share this with me that got their whole chart filled in really nicely. And so it may not be the exact data, but this will give you a rough idea. We went in and we filled in. So the first time we only selected 25 organisms to start our population with. And so it looks like this. And then as we went through the next generations, generation 2, you can see here the population changed. We had some reproduction going on. They ate, we reproduced again. We have a greater population. In generation 4, that's the beginning there. We went ahead and we again increased our population. And so I just wanted to show you that so that you would know that there was that other factor that I read when I was talking about the purpose of this lab, and that is the limiting factor of space. There's only enough room for 50 organisms on the rocky shore or on the coastline here. Fine. We're going to continue on to generation 5. And so we go ahead and do our regular reproduction like we had done in the past. We have reproduced to have two carnivorous snails, 22 orange mussels, 13 barnacles, 19 of the green chitin, and 4 of the herbivorous snails. Okay. So when you add that all up, it'll be 6. That gets us our 50. So actually by the rules to reproduce, there should have been more than 4 of the herbivorous snails. However, because we only have room for 50 organisms, then we can only go up to 50. So any other violet herbivorous snails would have been pushed out of the ecosystem. So we went ahead and now, as you go through these next generations, we did the same thing each time. We had our population generate for the new initial number for the generation. Then our red herbivorous snail either ate or was died. And so as we went along and did that, we have our 5th generation there. When we go to reproduce for our 6th generation, the first rule in reproduction is that the orange mussels double their population. So from 22, we double that, we get 44. Okay. The red snails always go in on top. And so when we do our reproduction for the red snail, it doesn't meet the rule. We add one. So we have 2 red snails. We have 44 of the orange mussels. So that's 46. And so there is only room for 4 yellow barnacles. It looks like when we rolled the dice, the red carnivorous snail ate one of the yellow barnacles. And then we go through the reproductive process again. When we go through the reproductive process again, the red carnivorous snail gets to add 1 to its population. And so when we look at the orange mussel, they typically double in population, but there's only room for 47 of them because we have red carnivorous snails that get their spot first. And so we have 3 red carnivorous snails, and there's enough room for 47 orange mussels and then nothing else. All the rest of the species have had to move on or die. Okay. And so you see that trend, and that trend continues throughout the rest of this activity where we have just the red carnivorous snails and the orange mussels, and the population kind of levels back out because we have a limiting factor with our carrying capacity of the coastline being 50 organisms. But we get generation 5, we're filling up a little bit more, so this is not exact. And then by the time we get to generation 6, all the purple ones, all the herbivorous snails have been booted out because there's not room for them. And then the green chitin and the yellow barnacles were pushed out. And these last generations, it's just the carnivorous snail and the orange mussel. Okay, and so that takes us through all of our generations there. And the reason, again, that we only have so many mussels is because there are only 50 spots. There's only room for 50 organisms. And so the carnivorous snail gets top priority. They have the advantage there where they take over and they get their living quarters first, or their habitat first. And then the mussels were next, and they took over the rest of the 50 spots. It to exploit the rocky shoreline more efficiently than other populations in the community, and it wants you to explain. In class, we talked about we got to know what all the words in the question mean in order to answer the question. And so when we talk about something exploiting the rocky shoreline, that means that this organism was something that was able to take in all the resources and use them all to their advantage. And so I want you guys to fill in which of the organisms had a trait that made it more successful in this environment. So I hope you filled in the answer, the orange mussels. The orange mussels have a trait that make them more successful in this environment. And on your sheet, you might want to add what that reasoning is. The orange mussels had a reproductive advantage where the orange mussels would double every time that they had a new generation. The yellow barnacles, the green chitin, and the violet herbivorous snails did not reproduce at that same rate. They reproduced only, got half as many as they had in their original population. So that's an important fact to know. The orange mussels definitely had traits that made them more successful. And one of the things that made them successful was their reproductive advantage, or the way how many they reproduced at a time. Then we go in and we want to compare the change in the diversity of of generation 1 to generation 10. So what is the major factor that accounts for this change? So biodiversity. Biodiversity is one of our vocabulary words in this unit. Bio, it means life, and diversity is differences. And so we want to talk about how many different life forms there are in the community when we talk about biodiversity. And so when we do that, if we look here at the first part, generation 1, in generation 1, we had 5 different species plus the starfish. When we go down to the last generations and look at generation 10, all we had left were the red carnivorous snails and the orange mussels. So when we look at that, the biodiversity of the community decreased. And it decreased because... type in what you think. Okay, so the reason that the biodiversity decreased is because the orange mussels had such an advantage that they took over the ecosystem, and now we only have 2 different species in that community. All right. The next question, and please remember, anytime you need to pause the video so that you can get enough typed in, or you can rewind the video and listen to it again to make sure that you're getting it. Okay. So the next one asks us to define biodiversity and explain how it affects the ecosystem, and how did the simulation justify the concept of biodiversity. So again, biodiversity, I gave you a definition just a few minutes ago. Bio is the life, and diversity is the differences within life. So biodiversity is the differences, different life sources, or the different variety of organisms that live in the community. And so I want you to fill in these blanks. An ecosystem with more biodiversity, ecosystems with more biodiversity are, and tell me, are they more successful or less successful? So tell me more or less in that first blank. And then I want you to explain in your words, your understanding, the because. Go ahead and pause it if you need to, so you can write a because. Okay, so ecosystems with more biodiversity are actually more successful, and they are more successful because there are more organisms within the community to pull from. If we have a community that has just one producer in it, like our food web at the beginning of this, if something were to happen to the phytoplankton, then nothing else in the community would be sustainable. Nothing else in the community would be able to live, because the organisms that eat the phytoplankton would not have any food, and they would have to move on somewhere else so that they could get food. And it kind of has a domino effect all the way through the food web. Okay. But if I have 3 producers, so I have 3 plant sources, then there's more plant sources for the environment to fall back on. So if something happens to just the phytoplankton, but there are 2 other producers sources within that ecosystem, then the chances that the whole ecosystem will live increase. There's more different organisms that can fill a niche. And a niche is like the job of the organism so that they can continue sustaining the ecosystem or keeping the ecosystem going. Okay. Make sure you type something in there. Make sure you've added to it if you need to make sense. We're going to talk about the graph of the data next. And this, again, is not going to be the exact graph data. It's kind of just actually showing the trend. But if you see, it starts off in section A. Section A would be like generations 1 through 4. And then it has section B, which will be the next couple of generations. And then section C, which is going to be those last generations that we ended up within our data table. So we want to discuss why the graph looks like it does. Why in section A is at a pretty constant low level? Why in B does it increase rapidly? And why in C does it level back out? Okay. And so that is the next 3 questions that are there. Or the next 2 questions, 3 answers. And so I want you to go ahead and put what you think. So pause, and I want you to type what you think for each of those answers, section A, section B, section C of that graph. Now that you've seen it in a different color, you can add or correct yourself if you need to. But section A in that graph, in those first several generations, the orange mussels population stayed pretty consistent because the sea star was eating some of the orange mussels, about half the population most of the time. When we get to section B, the orange mussel population increases because it doubles its population every time in reproduction. And so in doing that, it's going to have a rapid growth because we've removed the starfish. They're not getting eaten. So they kind of take over and have this huge jump in their population. In section C, the population leveled back out because the coastline has a carrying capacity of 50 organisms, which means that once we hit a maximum of 50, it's like going to the hotel. All the rooms are full. Everybody else had to go somewhere else. So we only had a carrying capacity of 50 organisms. And so it levels back out because we meet that maximum, and it just stays at that maximum of 50 organisms in the population. At the bottom here, I added 3 points of information that are important for us to understand, and we had a discussion about it in class. The first thing is going back to the discussion at the beginning when we were reading the reading where we talked about Darwin and survival of the most fit or the fittest. Organisms cannot adapt to their environment, okay? Instead, the most fit to the environment survive through natural selection, and the population eventually adapts. So populations adapt. Adaptation is a genetic change in the population over time. Okay. Another important concept in this is the carrying capacity. Carrying capacity is the maximum number of organisms that an ecosystem can support. The carrying capacity of our specific activity this time on the coastline was 50 organisms. It's kind of like your backpack. Your backpack can only carry so much stuff. You can cram it full and cram it full and cram it full, but at some point it's fallen out the zippers, it's busting through the seams. It only has a certain capacity that it can hold. And so the shoreline or an ecosystem is the same way. It can only support so many organisms or life forms before it's full and everything else has to go on. Now, the last word here is limiting factor. And the limiting factor is anything that limits the population growth. Okay. So for our example here, the coastline, the space of the coastline. So there were 50 spots and that was it. So that was our limiting factor, was space. If we look at something like going to the African savanna, there can only be so many lions in the savanna because there's only so much food for the lions to eat. It may be oxygen, it could be sunlight. It depends on the different ecosystems as to what the limiting factor would be. Again, today our limiting factor was the 50 spaces on the coastline. So I hope that helps you guys understand a little bit about what we did while you were gone. I know this is just a quick video and you didn't get the full experience, but I hope that by looking at the data and analyzing these questions, that helps you feel like you have a little bit of a better understanding. I'm going to have you guys go ahead and I want you to save this. Actually, not save it. It's already saved because it's in your Google Drive. But I want you to go down and you're going to click the share button. You're going to copy the link and then tell it you're done. And you're going to go into your 8th grade science journal and scroll down a couple more slides. And where it says Coastal Competition lab sheet and analysis questions, you can see here on mine, I have already pasted that link. So if you highlight and then push Control V, that will paste your link in here. And that way, if you want to get back to that later, you can go just to your science journal and it's like Walmart one-stop shopping. Our activity is linked in there so that you can get to it and not have to search through your Google Drive. At this point, the next thing that you get to do is take your coastal competition quiz. And so I'm going to show you how to do that in Canvas. Okay, I know that was a super quick through the lab that we took 2 days in class to do, but hopefully you got a little bit of information from that that will help you understand a little bit more. You just didn't get to actually roll the dice and like figure out how many of each we're reproducing. If you have questions about it, please make sure that you send me an email and let me know. Or if you're returning back to our campus here in the next day or so, then you'll be able to come in and ask me questions in person. The next step is to go ahead and to take the quiz over this. It's important that you know that you get to use this lab sheet for your quiz. So if you have somebody else that's hanging around, making sure you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, use the data sheet that we just did. Pardon me, not data sheet, the lab sheet that we just did as you answer the next questions. Canvas page and use the drop down over here on the left-hand side and click modules. And I've gone ahead and after your general resources, which you can shrink up, I've got this here. So depending on how long it's been since you've been here, you may have some things that you need to do for me. The first one would be if you have not opened your journal to view it, you need to open that. You'll use the template. And so you should have done that for me when we first started this, but you'll use the template on that. And you're going to go in and when the button pops up here, you'll click move and you're going to move that into your 8th grade science journal. And if you haven't gotten any further than that, just save it to Google. Just save it and I'll get with you when you get back because it's pretty complicated and I don't want to confuse anybody on the video here. Okay. But now that you've viewed it, you can go in to click next. And the next thing is the journal link. And so actually, if you were to go into that journal, which I just closed mine, and copy the link to that journal and paste it right here. So you can use Control V and paste, and that's not my journal, but it's something in there. So give me your journal link here. And then I'll make sure that you share it with me appropriately when we get back to school. But go ahead and make sure you put your journal link there and tell it to submit that assignment and it'll let you go next. And this is going to be our overview and study guide. And so this is the study guide that's for the first unit. And if you actually look through it on yours, it tells you how to make your folders. So I'm going to let you do that through the instructions. And if you can't figure it out, that's okay. I'll help you when you get back. Notice that this is due on September the 14th. Now that you've looked at it, you can open this link and that'll get it open for you. And then you make a copy and put it into your Google Drive, and I can help you sort it out if you don't have these folders set up, but it tells you how to do it here. Once you've seen that, you can click the mark as done and go next. This next thing is our vocabulary homework, and it is consists of these words right here, all these words that are in bold. Those are your vocabulary words. You get to choose what you want to do with them. So click the choice board and decide what you want to do with them. It is also due, as you can see up here, on the 14th. We're going to take our test over this unit starting on the 15th. And so every unit you do a study guide and you do a vocabulary homework, and they go together to make one grade. It's supposed to be a good grade to help boost up your scores, but that'll be there. So we've looked at that. You're aware of it. So you can go ahead and mark that as done and go next. This is a video that we watched in class about sea stars and how they eat mussels. And so it's just kind of an attention getter, and you are definitely able to watch that on your own time. I'm going to go ahead and click next. And that gets us to the Coastal Competition lab sheet and analysis questions. You don't have to open that because I already gave that to you. And so you can go ahead and click next. And this is the data charts, and the data charts were the things with all the little dots on you that I showed you. And so you can open it and put it into slide number 18, a link to it. But now that we've viewed it, we can click next. And that takes us to our lab quiz. And so when you go in to take the quiz, you're going to click on Take Quiz. And your access code is STARFISH, STARFISH, STARFISH. And so once you type in STARFISH, then you can submit that, and it'll bring up your first quiz question. There are a total of 9 questions on this quiz. So you'll want to go ahead and take that quiz, answer those 9 questions. Make sure you read carefully. Make sure that you use your Coastal Competition lab sheet that we just completed together. It's going to help you answer these questions. All right. If you have any questions or concerns, please let me know. Okay, so you made it through the Coastal Competition lab quiz. It was a quick 9 questions. Answer those. You can take it twice. If you take it once and you really are not understanding what's going on and you really don't know what to do, then don't take it again. And wait until you have a chance to come back, and you and I can go over things individually, and I'll let you know what's up and make sure you understand everything. And then you can take it a second time, and we'll play Let's Make a Deal to make sure that you get a grade that's okay. After that, we're going to do the Coastal Competition Lab CEJ, Claim, Evidence, and Reasoning. There's a reading prompt in there that you're going to use, and then you'll make your claim, and you'll tell me, based on the statement of this Robert Payne guy, he makes a statement about how the diversity of a community is directly related to the presence of a keystone species. And so you're going to tell me if you believe that the data from this lab supports that statement that he made, or it does not support that statement that he made. And then you're going to use the lab and the reading as evidence. And then you're going to you're going to use the lab as the evidence. And then in the justification, you can use the facts from the reading and the discussion and the questions that we went over to justify that. And we're going to finish that up in like the first 10 minutes or so of class on Wednesday, the 31st. And so if you're back in class, then that's what we'll be doing on Wednesday. And if you're still out, then you can go ahead and do your CEJ. And then there'll be some other things that we do that I'll post in Canvas and send out to you guys in your journals. And we can get in touch with you guys on a different video to let you know how that next activity went. I hope y'all are all doing better and that you get back to class as soon as possible. We miss you here, and we look forward to seeing you soon.